Welcome to the Modern Middle, episode 1 of Minimum Wage. If you guys don't know who we are, check out episode 0, our pilot episode. It gives a brief introduction of who we are.
A little more about what this podcast is about.
Yeah, a little bit more about
it. Yeah, a little intro. So.
Yeah, but let's just actually kick this thing off. Let's start off with this drawing you got here.
Yeah. So basically, let's give a little background. I mean, what we're doing with these core episodes of picking a topic and spending the whole episode focused on that. Just give you a little background about the way that we want to approach this, right? I mean, we're talking about minimum wage. None of us are economists. None of us went to business school. I didn't even take microeconomics or any economics class in college, right? So I'm not an expert, right? And we can't claim to be experts. But the best thing we can do if we're going to discuss these things is to try to spend as much time as we can in preparation for the episodes to understand more about, what an economist would look at in this case, right? But sort of trying to understand what experts are saying, get the opinions of different people, and obviously we have that sort of like tripartisan support here. So we're gonna try to gather all those thoughts and bring those debates into this circle. And so this, in particular, right, is part of sort of my exploration on minimum wage, and to give a background on what this economic model is this is sort of Econ 101. If I had taken an economics class in college, I definitely would have learned this. And just a disclaimer about this model is that it doesn't help us understand any solutions. It really just helps us understand just a really loose way to talk about this stuff and maybe visualize it.
I feel like maybe like a groundwork.
Right, and this is really just like this is a good way to put it. It's really just like as far as I can tell, again, not an economist, but it seems like it's just a framework that, as we get into it, I think it'll become more clear that, this is an oversimplified representation of a market, a generic kind of market, right? We're not even going to put too many specifics around it. We're going to try to talk about this in terms of just sort of these economic principles, at least to start, and then we'll start to evolve that as we start to apply it to where we are as a nation, policies that have been proposed or will be proposed, and just different things that we can get into there. So to walk us through this, I mean, I'm going to try to do it in let's say a minute here. So we've color coded this. Probably didn't pick the best colors, but pink up top here is labor demand. So that's this line right here. Let me move this mic over. So that's this line right here, and really what that says is that the higher the labor demand is, the higher the hourly wage is going to be. So if you really just draw sort of the same kind of line here at whatever point you're curious about, that will kind of give you the hourly wage versus the unskilled labor jobs that this model predicts, right? And you have the labor supply, and that's completely inverse to the labor demand. And a market is the relationship between these two things. So this is just the basic sort of supply and demand model. So for those of you that aren't sort of familiar with the inner workings of the supply and demand dynamics, this should help us kind of grasp that at least a little more. And again, right, not being experts here, but I think that even sort of in layman's terms, this can help us explore this area in a more responsible way, if you will. So we have demand, we have supply, and then what we also have here is this equilibrium wage, and that's where these two lines intersect. Another thing to disclaim about this model is that these lines they're not perfect. Every market is different, and these lines themselves are not straight in most cases. So whatever the complexities of the market are, contribute to the equation of this line. So, you could have one market where you have a curve like this and a straight line there,
or it's not going to be
curve
the same
and curve. And so, this intersection can happen in so many different ways within this graph for us to really understand how this works. But the principles behind them, if we could empirically map, a model or an actual, let's say, our nation and our economy, which we really can't, and that's why we all disagree so much on this. If we could, then these laws, these sort of base laws about maybe what a free market might look like, should apply. But the big problem is that we can't empirically measure that, right? Or at least it's super difficult.
Yeah.
So, to just kind of give us one quick example here, what we would do is, we look at an equilibrium wage. This is essentially the place within a market where, as the laborer, you say, I feel like doing this job, my labor is worth this. Like, I would demand this amount, right? And then from the other direction, from the business, the labor demand is the saying that, like, what they perceive that the value of that work to be. And obviously, we have so many different variables within this where corruption plays in or whatever, right? Where that's not just as simple as how we're explaining it, right? So that can't be measured. The equilibrium wage can't really easily be measured within a market. I mean, you could maybe take some polling data and try to get close to it or something, but there's so much complexity to it, right? But it does exist in theory, right? It does exist, and it's might
somewhere.
Yeah. So that's an ideal free market, right? And we know that we don't have a free market. We have regulations, we have minimum wage, we have taxes, we have all these things. So when we apply minimum wage, as we talk about minimum wage through the episode, what you can imagine is if you had minimum wage on that axis over there, you could draw a line just the same as we have here, and that would tell you, in essence, the general trend towards like unemployment. So if you raise the minimum wage, you draw the line over, that line drops down sooner than this one, that means we lose so many jobs, right? And so that's really just the basic tool. That's the basic kind of principles behind this that I think will maybe help us as we move forward.
Yeah. No, it definitely makes sense. There's also so many variables. Like we had brief discussions about this. We kind of have brief, quick bits of what we're going to talk about on the episodes, and there's just so many variables that come into play. And I know you said there's so many complexities, and this is definitely very base principles of how this works that alter this. And there's no way of really knowing what's hourly wage or what's unskilled or how many unskilled labor jobs or positions. Sorry for
You got your own.
actually meets that equilibrium wage. So, I mean, I guess that's just what we're trying to discuss is what wage we believe will make that equilibrium.
I mean, it's
wage.
not a perfect system.
Right.
This is it can't be perfect.
And I think anyone can make a claim that any economic model is flawed in some way.
Yeah.
And I mean, what we can say about this is that this is used in the majority of universities, at least in America, that I know of. And so, we can kind of, at least for our purposes, right?
Yeah.
Again, we're not economists, we're not the
somewhere.
experts. Like, I think that this is what we would have learned if we had done this in college, right? So this is a good place for us to start to really grasp what the complexities are and how they might impact different things in the market, right?
Yeah.
So why don't we go through and just real quick give like a quick summary of what our positions are on this topic of how we feel about it, what we think maybe should be done with it, where we might currently think that where our sort of comfort zone is about things that you would permit.
Why don't we start with you there, Justin?
Me? That's surprising. So we're gonna get the ball rolling. Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm right leaning, and I'm for a fair wage, but I'm also for you make your own life. So if you want a better job, better career, go out and do it. Like, you have the tools. I mean, in the first pilot episode, I talked about how I was. I believe I mentioned how I worked in restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
If I didn't, I have worked in restaurants for over a decade, and I just got to the point where the money wasn't good.
Mm-hmm.
I was a single father, and I was like, you know what, this isn't working. I'm going to change it. I'm tired of making, shit wage.
Yeah.
I need something better. So I got my degree. I ended up getting my bachelor's as well, and now I have a decent. It's a career.
Yeah,
it's a career with a salaried career.
And I think that's a common principle for people that are conservative to have, which is that, they kind of harp on that.
You make your own life.
Or like personal responsibility and like being a go-getter and a hard worker will help you succeed in America, whereas in other countries it may not.
Yeah.
Right?
My stance is, I could see raising the minimum wage. I could see, having a fair wage because it's pretty low. But this $15 an hour is astronomically high. You can't raise it more than double, and then you can't double the minimum wage and expect some sort of bad thing not to happen.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess, I do have, we'll get into that one. We're done to get into more discussion.
So what's your views, Steve?
Yeah. So pretty much my views on the stance is I definitely think minimum wage needs to increase, being the left-leaning guy that I am, of course. But I definitely have some little quirks with the amounts that they want to raise it to, apparently, like some of the things. And I do think that minimum wage should increase with inflation. So that's one of the big things that I'll probably get to. There are little tidbits of information that I've thought about and different things that we could do to the system to maybe tweak it a little bit to make it more, try to get rid of some of the flaws that minimum wage can cause.
Yeah.
So I'm sure we'll get
That's
into all
good.
that later.
But are you for the argument that fast food employees should be making $15 an hour?
Not 100% necessarily $15 an hour. The inflation rate that is going off of is 1968's with Lyndon B. Johnson. So that was the highest peak of what minimum wage was. And whenever people were talking about raising it to $15 an hour, they're talking about raising it to the amount that minimum wage was when it was at its highest point. That was a good economic period for us. We did have a boom, and there was a lot of positive things that were happening in that time frame. I do think it needs to be raised to, I would still probably say around like $12 to $13 minimum. And then I think in the areas like the cities and stuff like that, the states need to handle having an increased minimum wage in certain areas like that.
Yeah, and we see that right now, right?
Yeah.
We see that the states are
Seattle?
Yeah, there's a lot of states and even cities, like even here in Pittsburgh, like the city of Pittsburgh has a higher minimum wage than the state, and the state has a higher minimum wage than the federal.
Yeah.
And I think we can call back to this sort of market kind of dynamic, which is that every market is different. When we talk about a federal minimum wage, you're talking about affecting the people in Iowa the same as the people in New York City, and so
you can't do that, especially with standards of living.
Well, we can. We've been doing it, right? So we just, if we're gonna try to talk about what kind of policy we should promote, right? We should try to be, at least if possible, understanding of the fact that at a federal level, when you do that, you are affecting these people the same way, and it in some ways it can't be fair, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's okay. So that's your stance. Jay, you want to say something else?
No, what's your stance?
Yeah. So I've been a minimum wage worker before.
I think we all started there.
Yeah. And I think that more and more, as I've always held the assumption, like I think most people do, that the minimum wage was good, especially at that time when I was like only making minimum wage. I'm like, thank God they have this thing,
15, 16 years old, you just make money. You love
it. To you, at a 16-year-old,
man,
I get to buy Xbox games.
I'm washing dishes.
Yeah, so it was a big deal then, right? And I guess as I moved more in, I went to college, computer science degree, and when I got a skilled job, that became irrelevant to me, right? And that's another reason why on this graph we see unskilled labor, because we're talking about changing the minimum wage. We're not talking about affecting me or you guys, We don't make the minimum wage or really anything like remotely close to it in terms of being affected by this directly, right? Maybe there's some macroeconomic effects that would take place where it's like we might in years to come find that actually contributes to our wages.
Consumerism, if businesses jack up
prices.
Because
we would be affected. There's so many complexities there. We don't know for sure. But it's possible, right, that it could affect us, but not directly. So when we talk about it, we talk about the real things, which is who are the people that are going to be binded, right? If you raise minimum wage and someone was previously making, let's say it's current $7.25. Yeah. So, we raise it to, let's say it's 10, just a round number, right? And as a business that employs that person at $7.25, they're now at a fork in the road, right? They have to decide how they're going to handle this, because if they're not going to change their bottom line, then something's got to give in one direction or another, right? So either they have to cut this person's job completely, or they have to cut them down to part-time hours. And businesses are going to naturally do this, because if they can't meet their bottom line, they can't stay in business, and then all of these jobs go away, right?
Especially, at least in the current situation.
Yeah.
Like there's.
So with my standpoint, right? I've heard people tell me, different podcasts that I've watched that minimum wage is this radical idea that minimum wage is a bad idea, that it's just we should not have a minimum wage, And at first I'm thinking, well, especially in my younger days, how does that work? Yeah, like that's the only thing that unskilled labor has. It's, at least from my perception back then, right? And the more I became aligned with sort of libertarian and free market ideas, the more I realized that if you can find a way to have faith in the free market, then not having a minimum wage could be beneficial in that the market does a better job at protecting that unskilled labor than the government does with a minimum wage. I mean, we were just talking about how it was tied to inflation back in Roosevelt. Were you referring to the current minimum wage or the 15?
No, if they were talking about the $15 an hour, so if they wanted to link that.
But the point I'm making is that we don't update this that well, and you're talking about tying it to inflation, which is a great idea, right? If we were going to do like something to make it more dynamic and long term, right?
Yeah.
But we don't really pay. The government isn't paying attention to this in the way, and we did note in our research that of all the times that Congress has raised the minimum wage, it's almost always been in times of economic boom, which is
well, you have to.
Yeah, I mean, if the economy's not doing good, and you raise the minimum wage, the effects of the sort of fallout of those bindable positions ends up affecting the economy in a very, very bad way. When the economy's doing great, we see these studies come out that say we saw no change in employment. We raised minimum wage and we saw nothing happen.
Or little.
But everybody's making more. Everybody with these unskilled labor jobs is making more money now. So this has got to be a good thing, right? Mm-hmm. And it's obviously it's about these dynamics and the net effect of these changes.
Very situational.
So that's my position. It's radical, I know, but I mean,
just no.
Yeah, because I believe that the free market can do that. Now, do I think that the government has a role in monitoring the free market? Yes.
Yeah.
Because I've already kind of explored that. What if this was in place? What if there was just the free market to take care of the worker? Right? What's to stop this niche market of big corporations saying we're just all going to agree to pay our labor at at this rate.
Yeah, they agree on their own.
Yeah, we all price fix the labor. And then, the free market's taking care of it, right? It's not, right? Because they all price it. And that has to be illegal. We can't have that kind of thing going on.
And that would be a loophole. And
that's something that the government should be looking at, right? If we were living in this sort of hypothetical world where there was no minimum wage. And, I know there's going to be a knee-jerk reaction to that idea. I do. All I'm asking is that we have an open mind. Right? These are all possibilities, right? Let's explore what actually leads us to believe these things, and if we were to say go with that theory, what we could expect to happen. And again, all of this is really speculation. So feedback from viewers, right? They're gonna call stuff out. You're gonna get economists. This guy, this guy does not know what he's talking about. And we welcome that because basically this is just our sort of attempt at having a friendly conversation based on what we can find.
That's right too. We use that feedback and try to learn, and we'll just kind of look at that and be like, wow, that actually makes sense.
Yeah. But, so let's before we get into real nitty-gritty points about positions, let's try to focus more on minimum wage. Just give a little bit of history there, and it's part of the influence of my stance on it, right?
Yeah.
So when we look at really objective sources from the past, right? These are just actual quotes of people from that time period when minimum wage was being enacted. What we find is that, it was actually, let's do this. The very first time minimum wage was tried in America was in Massachusetts, I believe in 1912. And the only reason that they passed the minimum wage law in Massachusetts was because they wanted women and children to be out of the market. And I'm not totally sure what their motivation was, but I do know that it was effective. Before that law, women and children were allowed to work. And it may have been religiously influenced, that women and children should be in the home or something.
Then old-fashioned, would be a stay-at-home, taking care of the family.
And we know that at that time the government was run by completely men, right? So maybe that's what it was. Either way, they passed a minimum wage law essentially not because they cared about the livable wage, but they didn't want women and children working. And then the next time we see it is right after slavery when the railroads were being built. and it was used by the labor unions to price out the African Americans that were unskilled.
I kind of want to go back to
Sure.
one thing you just said just a second ago. Just specifically dealing with, they didn't care about the livable wage. They were just trying to get the women and the children out of the market.
That's a good point.
I kind of want to make sure that we hit on the fact that they did care about the livable wage, but it was the fact that the women were and the children were in the market coming in and undercutting the amount that they were paid, that the males were paid. So they were getting paid less and taking the jobs away from the men. So this was a system that was giving these companies the ability to pay less.
Could you imagine that argument today?
Oh,
like
yeah.
With
the women and children are taking our jobs.
I want to make less than, no.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
No, yeah, especially when now with pay equality.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a really good point. I'm glad you corrected me because that is like the same kind of premise that happened right after that when we actually passed minimum wage. So what was going on was, there was all of the railroads being built. It was a booming industry in America. It was really what really like economically started to get us out of the recession that came after the Civil War.
Yep.
And so there was a boom of jobs. There was a lot of money being made, and African Americans were allowed to work finally, right? But they were unskilled, right? Because they were kept in terrible conditions.
Yeah,
and
they were
weren't
enslaved,
educated,
so they weren't able to work.
And so they were willing to work for less money than the white man, less hourly wage, because to them, any amount of money they could work for was good, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the labor unions kind of got together at a certain point. Again, labor unions all white at that time, and they advocated for higher wages for their workers. But they realized that even just advocating for higher wages for their workers without doing anything else about the African Americans was that that the African Americans were still going to come in and undercut and take away the jobs from their labor union. So. No, I'm not sure whether or not they petitioned the government or how involved they were, and I don't want to get into conspiracy theories, but ultimately they endorsed the minimum wage because to them, they realized that would stop this from happening, that African Americans wouldn't be able to get those jobs because their labor wasn't worth what the minimum wage was or higher. So
that's crazy.
So it has racist beginnings, and that's not to say that it's racist now. It's just to say that when we talk about this, and like I'm coming out with a radical idea here that we shouldn't have any minimum wage, but the point of bringing this up is to say, we look at the history and we take it for a grain of salt, but I think the grain of salt here is that we need to be careful who we trust and what their motives are when they endorse the minimum wage and say that it's like for these compassionate things.
You never know. Deep down, they might have those same roots.
Right.
Well, that's again, like I kind of want to talk about like the reason that back then that the African American people were coming in at a lower price was to undercut and make sure they got the positions. Back in those times, it was a lot more racially charged society. Like you said, slavery was just ending. And like you said, they were unskilled. They were just coming out of slavery. So it was a lot less prominent for them to get these positions. Whereas in today's time, in today's day and age, there's less of that racism. I mean, we'll get into racism another day.
Sure, another time.
That's a huge topic in itself.
Yeah.
But
there was probably do like a whole season.
But
there definitely is a lot less racism today as there was back then.
And that's why I said, that's not to say that it is racist today. That's just to say that this thing has been used, at least by people with, corrupt thinking, ill-intentioned people to sort of game their system. And when they're in power and they can say, like, no, I advocate for this law because it's going to do this for me, but it looks good for them, then, you know what I mean? It's just it's a double-edged sword, which we clearly know. Like, you raise the minimum wage, things happen with unemployment,
Yeah.
It just depends on all of these complexities, right?
The thing that we also have to keep in mind, though, is this is a labor union endorsing these ideologies to the government when the government was proposing the minimum wage.
Right. Like I said, I don't know that they petitioned the government or work with them or anything, but I'm just saying they did endorse it when it happened.
But we have to realize that, Franklin Roosevelt and everything, when he was coming out, he wanted this I'm going in the UBI right now. Don't. Not yet. He wanted minimum wage to be a livable wage. Yeah. And that was his whole spiel was, this isn't a means to just give them minimum money. This is a means to have them have an amount of money that they can live on. And that's where we aren't at now. And this is where I kind of get my opinions on from history. is like if that's what it was meant to be,
Sure.
we're not in that current state.
And back to what
right
you
now.
said, like the government's not adjusting this. I mean, you
Correct,
you
yeah.
recommended we tie it to inflation, and I think
Yeah.
that in and of itself would have made a big difference for where we are right now.
Correct. It
Because
would.
we can't play catch up.
Well, technically, actually, if you look at the statistics, and I'm not sure because I know the cost of value of products due to inflation and stuff like that is different, or the cost of living. But with inflation, back when Franklin Delano Roosevelt implemented minimum wage, we are still way above that amount. Like I said, the amount of that would bring it to $15 an hour is always relating to the Lyndon B. Johnson cost.
So you're
minimum wage
talking
in
about
1968.
where do we base
Correct.
our reference point when we say
Exactly.
inflation
Okay.
from this point,
Correct.
right?
Yeah, because
Okay.
Lyndon B. Johnson in 1968, that was the highest point minimum wage ever was.
Yeah.
And that's where they always equate it to be $15.
Which is the
an hour.
outlier, and it's just
Correct.
yeah.
That's like and like when you're going to the lowest, which is honestly closer to where Franklin Delano Roosevelt was, because I mean, just the inflation, cost of living went up so much.
Yeah.
It was a lower amount, so it's very. We would have to do substantial research to see
Sure.
where that point is before we actually map it to inflation.
yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. No, I mean just the idea, right? Is that inflation is a marker of sort of maybe how the economy is getting away from us
Yeah.
as the individual like worker or laborer, right?
Yep.
And so then just as a general principle, like I don't know, maybe it's not inflation, maybe it's GDP or I don't know. You know, again, not an economist, but something like that keeps it dynamic, right? And
Correct.
tied to sort of the market in a better way, because just kind of relying on the government to come through every. How often does it happen? Like maybe
And then
10, 12 years they reassess it or something? I don't know.
If we do something like that, we could stop talking about it finally. We could just like have it in the background, forget about it. It's just going
No, but
up.
but think about like what you just stated. Like it's crazy that figure can change depending on what time frame you use or what baseline.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you know,
Which is an interesting argument in
Yeah.
itself, because probably people don't realize that hey, they're basing what we're saying right now off this.
right? And you'll get
Correct.
headlines that claim things that you're
Yeah.
like, yeah, but where are they really basing that off of? And
They're
well,
just
then you'll
twisting
find
that
that they're
data.
basing off of that highest point of
Yeah.
minimum wage, and that that's not so fair, right?
Hey, you can
Yeah.
dicey territory.
Yeah.
I do agree with raising it, apparently.
Sure,
But
sure.
at that point, that was also an economic boom. It did
Yeah,
put a good
yeah.
it stimulated the market really well. They said they caught
Which we know it does.
spending, and yeah, that's
Okay.
like,
We know it stimulates the market. I mean, you've
Right.
brought up the idea that like if they raise the minimum wage, the workers that are making that minimum wage actually invest more of that money back into the business that they work at, and in businesses in general.
Yeah,
You
can
know,
kinda actually
it
help
was
out.
just like the surpluses go back into the economy in a lot of cases for these kind of workers, right? Because
Essentially,
they
like-
need the money, they need things. Like
Yeah.
they're gonna spend it because they need things. You know, you're not a millionaire. That's like any extra dollar I make is just gonna go in a savings account. You know.
Even when I was working at Wendy's or when I was working at Denny's, if I had got my paycheck that week and if it was an amount that I liked, I'd be eating my lunch right there.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Grab my lunch, go in the back
I mean,
of the break room.
I
and-
worked in the food for over 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, you're always paying.
You know how many half-off meals? Come on.
Yeah.
And that's like one of the things that like some of these smaller businesses, the restaurants that might have a little bit of higher prices and stuff like that, they need to realize like some of their employees might not want to buy their lunch now because they're not really getting paid. But if they're
Yeah.
getting paid a little bit more, your employees might be buying their lunch there a little bit more.
Right.
They might be coming in there, spending a little bit more money, stimulating your business and getting them that revenue to afford that.
And
take
so,
more of that cost.
and so, if I can just take us back to this real quick, another way that we know, sort of on these basic economic principles that are sort of represented in this chart, graph, whatever you want to call it, this model, what we think we know, we being economists that are telling us this is what we should know about the economy and Econ 101, right? What we think we know is that when you raise the minimum wage, you actually create a surplus of labor, because in this is pretty rational thinking, right? So if you're somebody who's currently not working, you're unemployed, and you're not going to be employed, you're not wanting to be employed because the minimum wage is too low. So for your particular situation, maybe you have, 2 kids, maybe you're a single mother, and you're receiving supplemental income from the government already. You're on this tipping point where you go, well, if I start working, then I might lose this, right? And so where do I really, it's not that I don't want to work, it's just that I want to make sure that I'm doing what I need to do, which is kind of hard to do at this level, right? Yeah. And so it puts them in a rough situation, because when the minimum wage goes up, right, that incentivizes the labor force to go, oh wait, no, that changes things, Yeah. I'm not going to work for $7.25, but if you raise it to 10, that puts me in a whole different bracket where
I've actually never thought about it like that.
Yeah, and so that's the supply and demand, right? Because those changes affect both axes, or
Yeah.
both curves, if you will.
It's crazy because like my whole argument is based around like, you know, the conservative, like, you know, if you don't like minimum wage or make your own life, but also from a business perspective, like if you jack up the labor prices, then I'm jacking up my prices or I'm cutting people.
Right.
But I never even thought to think like,
From the
hey, there's
individual.
people holding out, like
Mhm.
I'm not going to make that low money.
Right.
But once you jack it up, like, hey, I have an opportunity that I can actually make some money now. So
Well, because we know that if someone were willing to work for a wage less than the minimum wage, they can't get a job. I mean, not legally. No business can give them a job that's like, and there are carve-outs, there are exceptions to the minimum wage, but and we don't need to really get into that. I think almost every country with these kind of policies has exceptions for agriculture or for just different things. But so, you know, when we see minimum wage go up, really what we see is that more labor participation happens, right? People are incentivized to want to work. So that adds workers that want to work, which is good. But at the same time, what it also does, this is the double-edged sword of minimum wage, really, is that it drives the businesses on the other axis to say, well, we got to do something about this. You know, like we have to cut hours or cut positions, right? So really, you have more people wanting to work, but potentially
businesses
less
can't
jobs.
really
You know,
pay for
and so it just depends. There's tons of different like inputs that can affect that, and we could have individual conversations about each one of those and try to dissect that. But to say that we could come to some answer on the macro level, taking all things considered, it's just not going to happen.
I kind of think maybe we should start to move on to why we think certain ideas wouldn't work. Maybe try to hit on some of the ideas we thought
that works.
would have on each of the different opinions.
Yeah.
So why don't you guys just start off? Why don't you think that minimum wage being raised would work? So like you stated earlier about how
Well,
people should get different jobs or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Like,
So the whole reason I don't think raising minimum wage would work is because one, I believe it's 99.7% of the population is small business. Like in the country.
That's like a crazy bold.
Yeah.
That's equally as radical as my view. Like I'm like wanting to go over here and look this up right now. You know. Yeah.
So
you have to that's maybe of the types of businesses. So maybe it's like 0.3% are corporations, but that's still considered one business.
They're counting them. They're not counting revenue.
They're not counting revenue. We have to talk about the wage.
According to the Small Business Administration, 99.7% of all businesses in America are small and not large wealthy corporations.
That's the number of businesses.
Okay, so you're just counting businesses.
Because you have to think.
Which they're all individual tax entities.
Yes.
Right? So, and you know, what is it? Citizens United, corporations are people. Like, we could play that game if we want, but these are all just like tax IDs. These are people that pay taxes, whether it's a corporation that pays taxes, people that pay taxes.
Yeah.
Every single landscaper is considered their own personal business at that point. So you have, whether it's Amazon, who has billions of warehouses and stuff like that, is under one tax ID.
Okay, but so it's a bit of a high figure. But say, for instance, that even.
But it's not useless. No. Like
but even
we just need to
even if
understand
a high percentage of the businesses in America are a small business, okay, there's the ones who are going to suffer. Because I'm a business owner and I got 3 guys. I pay them $10 an hour.
Yeah.
You hike it up to 15. I'm getting rid of one of those guys because I can't afford that.
If it's even an option, though, right? I mean, maybe you can't even run your business
Yeah,
if you
exactly.
get rid of one guy.
Either I'm going to have to hike up my prices because I'm not making any money now.
Yeah.
Because that's coming out of my pocket.
Yeah.
So either I'm going to have to hike up my prices, and who's going to suffer?
Yeah.
Consumer.
Well, ultimately, but also the workers.
Yeah, exactly.
That
The
don't have a
consumer
job
and workers.
now.
I'm going to have to fire people, or
Prices.
hike up my prices.
Right.
Or nowadays, 2019, there's whole automation. I mean, Europe and we see it in America.
Yeah.
There's robots now that can do those type of jobs.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And we're
It's
seeing
already
that more and
happening.
more because
Yeah.
they can't. They don't want to pay people to do it if they can have a computer to do it.
Well, because to them, I mean, and my opinion on this, just to kind of weigh in, is that like they've almost been put in a position where they have to treat labor as if it's a commodity and not human beings. I mean, I think
Yeah.
anybody would agree with that. Even DJ, that like that's the sort of the
It's
basis
just
of
the
this
cost.
corruption is that they look at their employees at a certain point with these big businesses, like they're not. There's no personality to it. It's like
Yeah.
you don't know these people. They're really just like
They just cost you money.
they're just another
Yeah.
input to your balance sheet. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so when they see something change in another part of the balance sheet, they go, well,
Well, I got to
We're
recoup
gonna-
it somewhere.
yeah, we're gonna maybe do something here with the
And
wages, right?
and that's my stance. Is like you can argue people need a fair wage and the human nature, and people are people. But I argue that businesses are businesses. They need to make money, and
Yeah,
if
and
they're
there's
not,
and that aligns with my, and to give you another example, right? That aligns with mine and stance with the free market handling this. And I think an interesting thing, and this is a really important thing to understand about the minimum wage rising to that level. So your question was specifically why not 15, or why not raise it, or
Why not raise it in general? I'm trying to
Okay.
see
so in general, right? My stance is that raising again, my stance is that we shouldn't have a minimum wage. But if
Yeah.
we're gonna have it, like we already know kind of like some things about that have happened in the past and how the economy's been impacted by it, and then generally like it's been either neutral or positive, but if we're going to have it, the thing that bothers me the most is that raising the minimum wage raises the minimum requirements for the market. And so what that means is like, if we're saying you can't create a job at less than $15 an hour, and the business wants to believe that the job is actually worth 10 because that's sort of their axis there,
Yeah.
then we have an issue, because they're not going to. I guess my point that I'm trying to get to is that when you raise that bar, the people that, if we assume that their work, their labor is actually like has a value based on their skills, right? And again, this is like all talking about within the realm of unskilled labor, right?
Yeah.
And so even within unskilled labor, there's still levels of skills. I mean, you could go all the way down to the person that's like on life support in a hospital. They're still a human being, but they obviously can't work. They're not even conscious,
Yeah.
right? So it goes from productivity, if you will, of zero all the way up to something that makes you, worth your labor worth something that wouldn't classify you as unskilled. So what that does to the unskilled labor market is it moves that bar up. And so for anybody that wants to grab onto that bottom rung of the economic ladder, which is the minimum wage, they have to first get themselves to a place where their labor is worth that much in the market, or else how are they really going to get a job, right?
it's funny you use that illustration because like bringing it up, it's harder to reach now.
Right.
So
It is, and I think that common sense kind of like you can put yourself in those shoes, and you can imagine like, yeah, but like I only know how to do this one thing, and like that's only worth this, right? So until I can change that, right, I'm only ever going to be worth this much to a business because that's what they think it's worth.
This is actually one of the gripes that I have with minimum wage as well, because it can affect the people that are trying to come into the job
Well,
market.
the very people that we think we're helping, right?
And if you have these people that are staying into these fields because they necessarily are making enough to live, and then now they're not leaving, and there's not as much turnover in these fast food jobs, and you're kind of leaving the next generation out of the loop,
Right.
especially in a lot of positions. And this is why I actually even briefly talked about this to you before, but I think it would almost be like the minimum wage should be specifically for employees that have been there over a certain period of time. And I think we should almost have like a training position. Like you can have a training position where you can pay them under the minimum wage for like, let's say like a certain time period, maybe 1 or 2 years.
I see.
And then, so if you have this employee that you're paying them for like, I mean, I would probably cap that at a minimum 2, or maybe make it a shorter period of time, 1 year or something like that, but have them only get paid this amount of money for this amount of time. Then those people that actually don't only have the skills, like there's handicapped people, and there's people with mental issues and things of those natures that can only really work in a minimum wage field. Or like you said, there's just people that don't have the ability
Right.
to get a job over that. And they still want to live too. They want to live like a normal person.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you want to give these people an opportunity to do that, if you limit the amount of people that can be in a training position for a company or a business ID, or they get a tax write-off for having more full-time minimum wage employees, something along those lines, just to inspire them to keep those minimum wage employees after their training periods, so we're just not turning over training employees.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people their mind might go, well, shouldn't the government be in charge of like retraining people? You know, like if that's kind of them causing. Yeah, I know you don't think, but shouldn't. But I mean, we have had those in the past where the government came in, they saw massive layoffs, and they realized that these workers weren't going to be able to find a job where they sat right in that place. And so, but if they could, retrain them and give them new skills, then they could be valuable in a different market. The problem is, like we've heard, right?
Sneak previews. Never works.
Those was it between 0 and 30% effectiveness or something?
Yeah, it was something along those lines.
So
it's very
they're not good at that. They're not good at the retraining thing, and then part of that has to do with that unskilled workers are not the easiest to retrain.
It was like 20% of the people that were trying to be. That were from the job market that was lost were given the opportunity to get retrained by the government. And it was like 15% or probably a little bit wrong, but it was like a very small percentage of that 20%. So you're talking about like maybe 5% of people, 10% of people that were successfully trained.
So if we're going to do that as a government, as a policy, we obviously need to be better at it.
Oh yeah,
right? Because I think it
would
would
be
the
government could be better at a lot of things.
Oh, of course.
Speaking of another stipulation, just dealing with.
I want to say something after you're done too.
Oh, okay.
So go ahead.
Another stipulation, just quick, really, regarding the employees that are going to get college degrees after, because you had stated previously about people that need to go to the next job. So you were saying, like, you went to a school, you went to college program. So there are a lot of people that actually try to do that, but they go into positions in a different field that they're not really. There's no jobs for them. I mean,
you're saying someone goes to college, they get a degree in history.
Correct.
Philosophy, right?
And they're right back to the minimum wage market.
Yeah, they end up working in a restaurant. And I don't mean to disparage that, because like people should definitely go to school for those things. It's like, but that's how people find themselves. They find themselves with a degree that they can't use.
Yeah, but also you can move.
That's true. I mean, we know that the mobility in the market is not great right now. People are afraid to move, I think, in general.
Well, I agree, but
student debts.
There's a lot of things crippling people.
You kind of get locked into a certain position, and whenever people are in this amount of debt, you're kind of trapped.
What can you do?
But there's also in different states there's supply and demand.
Different markets.
Like there might be like in Pittsburgh, it might be harder to get a decent salary as a teacher or a certain position here, but somewhere else you might get paid a lot more. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's different outlets you can try, but I get what you're saying. But what I was going to touch on, you said like having like a timed minimum wage.
Correct.
So you said like being a certain time.
Correct.
I mean a time that they've been in or sort of like they've been employed or trained.
Yeah,
right.
Like a training time, like having a couple, like a year or two or something. You can be paid.
So you're saying you stay with the company. Does it have to be the same company or just the same?
Yes,
deal?
like I'm talking about you stay in the same place of employment for a certain period.
I think that's a really good idea. But would you? Here's an interesting concept on top of your interesting concept. Would you have like a minimum training wage?
That's what I kind of briefly said. Yeah. I don't know exactly how I'd plan this out. Like I'm no economist, but if I like
minimum wageception.
Well, so we already talked about how the federal minimum wage debate is just it's hard because it can't be a one size fits all. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that because you can't treat all these markets the same.
I think it's a baseline for states and cities.
It is, and it has a purpose for that because it kind of sets the bar for states to kind of go and modify from there, right? And that's maybe there's value in that. I think there is value in that. And I spoke to my sister today, who's a business owner. She owns three businesses that are in the service industry, food and
which you have to say.
So it was really interesting for me to get her thoughts on minimum wage. Apparently, this is something that her and her husband debate all the time.
Really?
Like when I asked her if she would talk to me about it, she was like, "This is our favorite thing to talk about. Like we do this all the time because
we should have them on some point
because they're worried. As a small business.
Well, yeah.
And the other thing is that she's a good person. She's a good business owner. She conducts her business ethically. So, for instance, she basically has like her normal staff, her entry level staff that she pays $8 an hour. She only has to pay them $7.25.
Yeah.
So she starts everybody out at $8 an hour, and then if you're a manager or you're in a manager role, she pays $14 an hour. And so she does that for a couple reasons. Number one, because she wants to be competitive in her local marketplace, because these people could go up the street and get a job if a competitor's hiring at a higher rate, right? So she raises it above the minimum wage because she wants people to come and she wants the good people to want to work there. And so she also pays higher because in terms of her business, and the quality of the worker that she wants, is she says, I expect more than just the bare minimum. You want the bare minimum wage, then in some ways, like, you might think, well, I only have to give the bare minimum effort, right? Well, if I pay you more, then it's okay for me to start to expect more out of you, right? And that's really just how these markets work, right? Like, the more skills you are, the skills you have, the more you're worth. Like, and I don't want to boil it down too much, but that's basically what she said, right? And it was interesting because I thought, giving my thoughts on, hey, maybe we shouldn't have a minimum wage, and hearing her thoughts on what it does to her business when it gets raised, more like you're saying, like, it can't be like too high, like high at once. Yeah. Because she even said, like, I can handle little changes, like a 1% change, like I'm fine with that. I think I can handle that, like, little by little. But this, like, big hike is just gonna cause too much commotion for me that people aren't gonna suffer, Oh
yeah.
Another thing that I think about is, like, hey, and this is actually an argument that we've had in other discussions. Like, hey, I'm a business owner, and all right, you give me, $20, and now you're taking 10 away from me. I don't know how to react. So that's essentially what you're doing when you hike the minimum wage up. Right. You have to pay your employees.
Oh yeah.
So I'm paying them out this. Now I'm doubling that, more than doubling, and I don't know what the hell to do.
Yeah. No, I think those times are very confusing and they're stressful for the business owners, small business owners, most especially, right? Because, like, I think we've talked about this, like, corporations, they've got the sort of, like, let's call it slush fund to maybe take it, but they also have, in a lot of cases, the greed that they don't want to actually absorb it, But a small business, and like my sister's, right, and she's trying to do this thing the ethical way. She doesn't want to have to be forced to treat her employees poorly, right? But just so that her business can survive. But what was really interesting was, at the end of the day, she said, no, like, I think there needs to be a minimum wage. And she has 3 teenage boys. They're in 2 are in high school, went to middle school, and she says, that she thinks that the minimum wage, it being tied to what a livable wage is. She said everybody talks about what is a livable wage. Are we talking about a single mother? Are we talking about a family? She says the livable wage needs to be tied to a high school graduate that has 0 work experience. Which, if she didn't have she didn't have, like, a bakery and, like, businesses, then her sons probably, they may not have the amount of experience they do. So she's personally, invested in that, like, even her sons getting out of high school, like, that should be the livable wage,
I can actually completely, agree with that. If you tie it to a livable wage for one person, you have to think, if you have 2 people living together, starting a family, they can both get a minimum wage job and pay that together. Now, if you have a child, we do have social social programs that can assist you.
Well, they're supposed to.
Well, it's supposed to.
Yeah.
Another
episode. Yeah.
Gonna push those off, but we have things along the line as welfare that can help.
They're supposed to pick up.
They're supposed to pick up on that slack where that lets off. You might not get to live the most luxurious life that you can, and I do think that. I think that fair raises should be happening as well. This is another thing that I talked about, possibly increasing rather than the minimum wage, is if you're loyal to your company over the years, maybe we increase, like, the percentage rate. Like, you have to give so many raises to an employee over a certain period of time, or increase the percentage of that.
I'm also a firm believer that businesses invest in people.
Well, they will when they can.
Yeah.
Right? I think what I've seen in the marketplace in the businesses that I've worked at is that they will, as long as they're able to, right? Yeah. And I think we could have another conversation about, like, Amazon's certainly able to, or Google's certainly able to, and they do, but, like, could they do more? Obviously, I think so.
But also it costs money to train.
Yeah.
I mean, if you train somebody skilled and you don't pay them a good wage and then they leave, it's going to cost you more money.
What you get is what a training wage would
There you go. But also part of my argument is with a lot of small businesses not being able to eat that cost,
Right.
we're now closing businesses now. And
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah, that's a big
And
factor.
I think we covered this already, right? Like we know that like when the economy's not good and you raise the minimum wage, whether that's the national economy raising the federal minimum wage or a local economy and they're raising the local minimum wage, if you do that when the economy's not good, then we've seen like some actual pretty bad consequences.
But the thing about it also, I mean, your goal is the ultimate goal is to stimulate the economy while paying people fair wages.
Yeah.
But sometimes, if, like, say this hike, this, $15 an hour, you're going to have a mass,
Layoffs.
unemployment rate.
Yeah.
You're going to have businesses closing, so you're doing the exact opposite.
Technically, right now, though, the economy is booming.
That's a good point. Well, that's what Trump tells us.
That's what Trump tells
Yeah.
us. I mean, there's.
That's great.
But also-
Unemployment's
But also, another argument is what's to stop somebody making, a buck or two more in a better job that they have, quitting and going like, I'm gonna go,
Right.
I'm gonna go fast.
Well, that's
And then we see people just leaving jobs of people we need.
right. And that's like what they call it, like the market. I think maybe like the market mobility. It's something mobility, right? It's like really how likely are people to get fed up with where they're working and go, screw this, I can get a better job somewhere
I
else.
mean, you constantly hear people
do that.
who leave, stressful jobs, high-paying jobs, just because they couldn't do it.
Some people say that they move to Colorado, like some people do drastic things. Some people move across town or just drive across town and start working there, right? But yeah, the mobility in the market is a big factor in terms of what the corporations or the businesses can actually impose on the worker in terms of, let's say, their corruption or their business decisions, because the more the laborer will walk with their feet, the more power they have. It's like, the whole negotiating tactic that I've heard people say whenever you go to whenever you're buying a new car is, I've heard people say, like, you're always, like, pushing back on the price and what you want to do. At least one time is just, like, get up and walk out. Just walk away, and they're gonna go, no, come back, no, please,
But then they end up not, and then you leave.
Right, well, maybe, right?
I want my car.
But the point is, they really want to sell you a car.
Yeah.
They're gonna sell your car.
And if you're like so offended by what they just said, you're gonna get up and walk out. Then that's gonna impact how they manage this moving
But
forward.
that's
So
actually, I mean, I wasn't even thinking about that when I just said this analogy, but like, we're at the point with, and I know like your sister is very ethical with her business practices, but we also have to look at the other side of the house. We do have these corporations and the things with these minimum wage employees that actually like the high turnover, because there is that minimal percentage increase that these employees get over the time, and whenever they hire new and train new employees, they get to pay them less. They get to
I always see that too. Get rid of the people who are making
Yeah.
a lot of money and bring in the.
And whenever people were trying to go into these businesses and they're trying to ask for more money, like, hey, I worked at this other McDonald's, so I want to be working here at this one for this amount of money or something along these lines. They're not really, they have almost less of a chance. I mean, I don't know any statistics on this, people may correct me on this, but as of right now, I'm under the impression that they have less of a chance to get that position if they work at another one if they're asking for more money, because the company is trying to pay the lowest rate that's possible, so that way they can get another employee. Unless they're going for like a managerial position or something.
and fast food is not a great example because they like basically standardize that stuff from corporate. No, because like McDonald's corporate is going to impose their own restrictions on wages for the fry cook.
But they're the ones that are paying them more.
That is
It's
also
like retail, very retail.
and that's also a very big percentage. That, I mean, it's not quite this percentage of the small businesses, but this is a big percentage of the market. We have to realize that this is happening.
Yeah, 'cause I'm pretty sure like retail and food retail are like the biggest minimum wage. I'm not sure of the figure.
They're up there,
Yeah,
for sure.
but retail and food retail has to be like.
Just real quick though, this is from like I believe it was the Congressional Budget Office or some sort of bipartisan congressional group that looks at this stuff. But they said that of the people making the minimum wage, only 17% of them are supporting anyone other than themselves. So that means that 83% of people making minimum wage are just they're just themselves, mostly young people, right? So that's why my sister has that opinion.
very big percentage is probably college students paying their college
Yeah,
tuition
could
while
be.
they're in school,
Yeah.
so they're trying to go along those.
But they're working unskilled jobs,
Yeah.
right? Because they don't have the degree yet, or right.
But they also have student debt, along with more student bills and car payments and things along these lines to get to these jobs. Which, honestly,
Which is
the
mobility.
student- Yeah,
we talked about.
the student is one of the most burdened people with debt that there is. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, because they're in that weird area where they're like,
Yeah.
they're getting that degree, so they have that debt, but they don't have the skills, so they're limited to what they can
and then
do.
they get out with this debt and they can't even buy a house or start their.
That's me.
Like,
I have a house, yeah. You know,
Yeah.
I still have student debt.
Yeah.
You know, it is sort of, I guess crippling may not be the word for me at least.
Yeah.
But you know, when we talk about the mobility, it's like, I mean, you know, my dream is to just like pick up and move to Puerto Rico, right? But can't really do that, you know. Like I got student loans and I got like
We got podcasts.
yeah. We could do it remotely.
No,
You guys could come down to Puerto Rico.
That's
But
fine.
also, I mean, we actually didn't hit on this in the introduction, but we all live in or work in a pretty IT-related computer
Yeah, we're
software
all computer
engineering-related computer science degrees. So our degree path has those options
But-
to be able to maintain and like manage our student debt a lot easier than people.
But
going
that's
out
also
with,
part of it, too,
Teaching
is-
degrees and other degrees.
Yeah, that's also part of it too. If you choose a field that's lower paying, you're not going to make as much.
Yeah, and I mean every individual makes this sort of assessment on what they want to do with their life. It's like these. It's almost like this, like these two factors that are always opposed. Like I want to make money, but I want to enjoy my job, right?
Yeah.
Like, and so you find where that equilibrium point is for you
That
as an
happy medium.
individual, and that's what you pursue, right? At least most people. And I mean, there's plenty of people that work jobs that they hate.
Yeah.
And they're not even making that great money, right? And then and most of that is probably the people that we're referring to here and affected by minimum wage.
Or the
But
ones who make like astronomically money who just don't give a shit about their job. They just want the money.
Well,
like Wall Street. Like
Yeah,
we were
yeah,
watching
yeah.
the video. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm pretty happy. I got lucky and found that nice.
Yeah. No, it's.
We're blessed, right? Like
Yeah.
we
we
don't.
chose career fields that we feel passionate about,
Right.
we enjoy, and they're decent paying salaries.
Yeah.
That's really hard to find like nowadays.
Well, I mean, we talked about automation earlier, and like the technological boom that's going on, it is going to continue, right?
Yep.
Like we know this more than
Well, this is
the average person because we work in the field, but like it doesn't stop.
No.
Well, think about like
No.
20 years ago, 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah. What
You had
was
to
that?
carry around CDs and you had to carry around cassette tapes.
Your Walkman.
Yeah, like it's insane that you
Yeah.
have computers in your pocket
Think
at
about
all times.
Yeah.
Think about in 20 to 30 years from now when minimum
Yeah.
wage jobs don't even exist. I mean,
Because all of the robots can do
Because all of
that.
the robots are. I mean, almost
And
every
that's
minimum wage
coming.
job is already automatable, and that's something
lot
we
of
have
them
to
are.
keep in
Well, they
mind.
say what Europe and America.
And you know, those are projections. These are people in Silicon Valley that are saying we're pretty sure that we can automate that job within the next 20 years. But you know, we work in software. Like we know that there are times when you think you can do something and then you go and actually try and do it, and it
Bugs.
turns out that's not the truth, right?
Yeah, but
But-
in certain instances, but there's always a way to accomplish that. Like
Yeah,
it's
Given enough time.
given enough
right?
time, and
Yeah.
like you
But-
can always have a chance.
But like one of my buddies, one of my friends, her brother, he works for a robotics firm. They make robots, and they use robots like stock shelves. in
Oh yeah, but
grocery
you've seen
stores.
the Amazon factories and how they're doing that.
Yeah,
robots
But like,
and
there's
then-
now robots who are stocking shelves. We don't need people to stock shelves anymore.
Oh
Yeah.
no, we don't need. I mean, shit, we have personal robots on our house that sweep our
Yeah,
floors now.
exactly.
I
mean,
don't.
It's coming.
I wish I did.
Well, yeah,
I
I,
use-
don't
I
either.
use-
I got student loans. So.
Honestly, almost everyone else in my family has one of those things. I go to their house, they're just driving around.
Yeah, I do it the old-fashioned way.
You see the videos of the cats, like dressed as sharks on the
riding it. Yeah.
My favorite ones are the ones where it like picks up the dog shit that he
Oh god,
he, like,
oh,
smears
it's
it all over
so
the
bad.
house.
Don't yeah,
Oh,
they're
that's a
terrible.
bit of a tangent.
Yeah, but yeah, I guess we
So-
should get back to minimum wage.
So I mean, let's try to maybe advance this a little bit because I think we've covered a lot of the different dynamics. You know, we've from different perspectives, from different inputs, just different things happening in the market. I mean, unless there's anything else sort of along those lines that we feel like we need to cover before we get into like maybe the future. Like, what are we gonna do? What are we as a country from this point looking forward? Like, maybe this is where we try to find where the middle is. Like where can we
Yeah.
compromise on
So-
these ideas? Because I think there's credence to all of these things, right? And I always say that the truth is always in the middle somewhere, right?
I think
I kind of want. Oh, go ahead.
there's a couple more things I want to
Okay.
touch on. One of the big impacts is so the minimum wage is geared towards the unskilled labor,
Right.
and minimum wage hikes usually hurt unskilled workers. They said in 2012 analysis, New York State minimum wage increased from $5.15 to $6.75 per hour, found a 20.2 to 21.8% reduction in employment of younger, less educated individuals.
Right. And we and that's like a sort of a real life instance
Yeah.
of the theoretical
Because
thing
if you
that we
think
just
about it, they're
covered, right?
trying to help
Yeah.
these people who don't have the skills,
Mhm.
and 20 to 21% of them were just gone
Right.
after that hike. And that was $1. That was like $1.25.
I'm not sure if these positions were gone, but it's like because it's talking.
Well,
that
not the
statistic is
positions were
talking,
gone, but
yeah,
unemployment.
because those statistics
In
were
that
talking
demographic.
about a certain demographic of people.
Right.
Whenever you increase the minimum wage, you have a whole new demographic of people that are interested in that job. You have maybe people that even have college degrees that were getting paid less
Sure,
at that
it
time.
just
and they were
shakes everything up, right?
It does.
And so it's hard to know what's really going to
Yeah.
shake out in a smaller market. Well, New York's a huge market, but it's not national.
Yeah.
And so it's smaller than the national market, but it's still so complex that
Yeah.
it's hard for us to know for sure. That is like we say, correlation isn't causation. There's correlation there.
Yeah.
But we also don't know for sure what else happened in that market. I mean, the basic theories like we've got here say that should happen, but there's just, we don't know what those curves are. We don't know what the slope of these lines are, what the equation is that defines what the labor demand is and what the labor supply is.
And there's just like we even said before, like we don't know the state of the New York City economy at that time.
Right.
Like, there could have been things that that could have been an economic time of struggle for them. But
Yeah.
that it just we kind of have to pick and choose our points to increase the minimum wage, and that is a big thing.
We actually have a fair argument, like how you stated, do it when the economy's booming.
Yeah, which we've seen historically. That's what ends up happening. That's just a natural thing. That's even if they didn't know that in Congress, that's when they felt that it was okay to do.
Yeah.
And so when we look at history, all the times they did it, we were great. We were doing good economically.
Granted, I still think we need to do it at some point and then tie it to something along those lines to try to. I think it would help stabilize our economy. I think if you're talking about the amount of money that people are paid and the amount of money that they're going to be putting back into the system, if you kind of have this grow and move with you, you're kind of stabilizing the system. Whereas if you're lowering the pay of people as the inflation goes up, you're creating more of a gap, you're lessening the gap, however it works, but that just causes this.
See, I have to push
variable
back
complexity.
because my theory, right, is that the premise of it in and of itself destabilizes the economy. If we're saying economy equals market, right? So wherever you're raising that minimum wage on whatever geographic region, that's going to have effects. It's going to have
There's going to be negatives.
yeah.
Unemployment.
Well, maybe, right? I've seen studies that I think it was in New Jersey raised their minimum wage, and when they did very in-depth analysis, they even compared it to wages right across the border in Pennsylvania, compared them, and they concluded that they didn't really see any impact. I mean, they saw a very, very small, very minuscule amount of job loss, but that could be attributed to anything, so it's not statistically significant enough to say that that really happened. Essentially, they saw no change. There's just so many other things that go into that, right?
Well, there was another video I watched, I forget where it was. Might have been Seattle, but I'm not really sure. Where they were hiking up the minimum wage to 15.
Mm-hmm.
And the business owners we don't want it. They was coming from the mouth. They're like, we can't afford this.
Right.
We're going to have to close shop because of this.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of small businesses are saying. We can't afford that 15.
Right. And if we're talking about people being ethical in their business practices, I mean, I don't want to paint a region, but I think everybody knows that the West Coast is a sort of a left leaning. I mean, look at California in every election, right? I mean, it's a heavily Democrat state, and that living on the West Coast just tends to lead to more liberal thinking, right? And so those are the people that are going to be most willing to pay that $15 rate because right? It's
Yeah.
for the people.
Yeah.
It's for the social welfare.
And
And there still are plenty of people that are like, yeah, but it's still going to really hurt me, you know?
granted, that is like, I don't agree with the 15. I kind
Right.
of think we need to find.
Yeah,
somewhere
clarify
to-
that, right? I mean,
Well, you said 12. You said 12.
Yeah, I
or
think
13.
$12 to $13 an
I don't
hour
think
as
so.
a minimum would be. I think, but
No way.
when I think you've uncovered some stuff that really, and you know, my stance is, at first I thought, how do you really even compromise with that?
Yeah, I was
like you
wondering
don't
that too.
compromise with like I don't want it at all versus two people that say it should be here, it should be here, right?
Yeah.
My argument is vastly different than yours, right? But I still think that there's some stuff because I mean I admit like we do have it. We live in this system now. We have a minimum wage and people are impacted by it as part of their hourly rate in a lot of cases, right? And so like if we're going to do something, we look at where we are now, the system that we're in, and we say like, well, can we afford that, right? And like my sister said, like she can handle like small increases, right?
Yeah.
The problem is that like we haven't done that. You know, we haven't continued to do small
Well, I don't even think
increases.
she'd probably be able to handle DJs.
What, at $12?
$12, $13?
Well, I think if they also, I mean, this is again stretching for some random policy that I came up with in the back of my head during
Well, your policy sucks.
with the training time. So like,
no,
if
I
you
like
do
that
have
one.
the
I like
training
that
time
policy.
implemented while you do have you increase the livable wage, then you're hiring on employees to train them, and then you're moving them through. So you're paying somebody at a lower rate, like $7 to $8 an hour, which is still closer to our minimum wage now, but that still allows you that flexibility to increase the wage of some of your employees.
Yeah, so Australia has that. I read an article, and by the way, like we're referencing the sources and stuff. We're gonna try to
that's
include
right.
all this stuff, like if we're making explicit references to facts, like
we'll
we're
cite
gonna try to
them
put that stuff in the description as much as we can. But I read an article about the changes in minimum wage in Australia, and I'm not sure when it was. It was semi new. I'm going to say within the last 20 years. They instituted a system where they basically have like almost like we have like progressive taxes where it's like, you know, categories and rates. So what they have is something like 16. If you're 16 and under, there's no minimum. And I'm not sure what their child labor law is. I think there's some need for that in the market. But at any rate, I mean, a 16-year-old can work, and even a 14-year-old can work, cut some grass or something, right? Like that stuff's fine.
You can work
shovel
here,
the sidewalk.
work permits, workers permits, and
Right.
stuff like
Yeah,
that.
you can be 14.
Okay, so they say
15.
so. Australia says under 16, there's no minimum. So that market, vast majority of this unskilled market, is not affected there, right? Because the employers aren't held in terms of my concerns about the potential effects of it, right? I like that because I'm like, wait, you know, the biggest portion of the people that we're worried about in this unskilled labor group are actually being like the system is adjusted to account for them.
Yeah.
Right?
The reason I do actually like that system, and it was actually it was a podcast with Joe Rogan, and he was a guy that was actually on the libertarian viewpoint of view is completely getting rid of minimum wage. Okay. He actually did a discussion that was based upon how the gas stations and everything used to be more full service gas stations and stuff along those lines, just because they were able to pay employees below minimum wage or less money, and they were getting away with it. Now, if you have these, like, I kind of like the impression that we could give kids more money and they could just work and wipe my windows off, pump my gas for me, and something very easy and very monotonous that you would even tip. I mean, I'm sure that would be you could tip. Those kids would get tipped as well. It's not like that. But I kind of actually like that policy where people under a certain
and then they have the same thing like you proposed, which is that they have some kind of training rate, which I could get the real numbers if we want, but their minimum wage ends up actually being like, if you try to figure out what that sort of average wage is, it is higher than ours. And so then the article goes into sort of trying to break down what those changes did to the employment market in Australia, and there were negative effects. I mean, there are a lot of economists that look at that and go, "Oh, nothing bad happened to the Australian market." And this goes into unemployment, which we should probably cover, right? Unemployment as a measurement. There are essentially two numbers that people will throw out there. There is the what they call the headline unemployment. It's the U3.
U3.
U-3 is how they refer to it. And what that takes into account is only the people that are looking for jobs. So, there's a whole class of workers that lose their job or on unemployment, and then they're like, I think they call them like discouraged workers, or just different things that is like reasons why they decided they're not even going to consider searching for a job, right? So the U3 is just the people that want to work but can't. The U6 is the other one, so U-6 takes into account all of those other categories of people that don't that aren't working but could. So this is like non-disability essentially. So that's more of a real picture of what unemployment would be, right? I mean, I get like in this model, supply and demand, like if you're not looking for a job, you're not part of the supply, right? But at the same time, when we're worried about the welfare of the people in our nation, why don't those people matter in terms of our understanding of unemployment, right?
So, I mean, I think we discussed most of the major talking points we have. I kind of just wanted to, instead of trying to come to a consensus on like exactly something, because like you said, your viewpoint's pretty different, why don't we all just do a closing statement on what our opinion is what we would do in the future, personally, like what your opinion is on, just real quick glimpse, what you hope it goes to in the future.
Okay, you want me to start?
Yeah, let's start with David.
Well, it's at a certain point it has to be realistic, right? Because these policies don't, like, just because I believe that the free market should take care of this and that we should have no minimum wage. I mean, how do you think that's going to go over? Like, how is a politician going to sell that and then still be elected? So the reality of it actually happening, would love to, but the reality of it actually happening is very difficult. Just like I told you guys, right? I'm presenting a radical argument here, and that's only because like pretty much everybody believes that it does a net good. I've seen articles that say, listen, good economists say this, good economists say this. There's room for reasonable debate here, and people that say that this debate on whether or not the minimum wage is a good or a bad thing, like people will say that debate is over, that it is certainly a good thing, and this guy's presenting a very valid argument as to why the debate is clearly not over, because like we said, you can't predict the markets, you can't model them perfectly. So how do you control for variables? How do you know what these changes are truly doing, right? So for me, realistically, a policy, I'm not in favor of these low resolution policies, these blanket statements from the federal government that says we're going to treat everybody the same. Like, we know that these different groups of people exist. Why can't we have a more high resolution policy in place that does like what you're saying, like what Australia does, that says like we're looking at the market, it's all really happening down here in these young workers, so let's let them let's remove this barrier for them to grab onto that ladder, like I said, and let them work, and then we have them covered at a certain point here under a real kind of base living wage for adult skilled workers, if you will, right? So I support that. I think that at least for America, that's a great first step, because where we are now is like, so. Raising it to 15 is like, I feel terrible. Like, I would not want to see this economy after that happens. And raising it to 12 is like, we're almost getting close, And so with the current minimum wage, if we weren't going to modify it to something more advanced and high resolution, like I'm saying, then I probably wouldn't want to move it. Maybe like I said, incremental, maybe like 3%, 4%. Like you're saying with wages, maybe we have like a mandated raise, but in minimum wage, right? Like the minimum wage goes up, whatever, right?
Like a couple
I don't
cents.
know.
It's like a couple cents.
But it has to move. I think that's the thing. It has to stay with the worker.
Oh, yeah, no, I kind of
just waiting for the government to come back in and actually, we're going to catch up on where you should actually be. If we're going to do it, then we should tie it to something meaningful in the economy that can keep it in pace with the market, right?
The only thing that's really hard with that and like keeping that with the worker is what if they don't just hire them then? They're just going to look at the people that are at the lower ones. But that's just
I'm curious, I guess, because I'm not sure what you mean by
like
that.
If like let's say like you're saying that wage follows them from a job position to a different job position. So like let's say they worked from their minimum wage at $7. Okay, They worked at that job position until their pay got to $8. Now they go to a different job this employer has the option to choose between hiring somebody at $7 or hiring somebody at $8. Whenever it's an unskilled position, like a fast food worker, the employer, there's a good chance they're going to just go with the $7 employee.
Yeah.
And it kind of might hurt them in the long run.
Yeah, and
like,
so
it's
that's
tough to dictate.
I think earlier you said that like your training wage would be about one company, and it'd be nice. I think in an ideal world we would be able to track that by like maybe like categories. Like here's the category of work, right? And so that you could have skills within that market. And so if you're still in that market, then that training experience still counts. Because if we want to entice the mobility, because it keeps the labor wages competitive. Because if you're willing, like I said, if you're willing to walk out and go get a job somewhere else, then you can have a big impact on that business that's not treating you well.
So I'll kind of just like let this tie in what I think the feature should be, in my opinion, just because we kind of hit on that. I think that the training wage should be allocated to the businesses can only have a certain number of employees on that training wage. So you'll kind of have this influx of businesses looking for two types of positions. They'll be looking for full-time positions at a base living wage and full-time positions at a training wage, because they're going to want to keep the number of employees training so that they can keep their costs down. Yet they're going to still need those full-time employees. Let's say if one of their full-time employees quits that was already living there for a year, and they need somebody to go into this full-time position. They already have this experience. They don't have to hire somebody on as a training person, but I mean, then you have to think about those people that are trying to move into that position after that certain.
Yeah, and I think in general these are nuances that like we would leave up to the economists. Like tell us what would make sense here, because because I think that like but the general idea that we could do better than this sort of like just sort of lazy approach of just like setting a nominal value and saying that's what the minimum wage is, and we can't be any smarter than that, you know. I mean, isn't that America? Is that what they do?
But as for the rest of my future policy, I do still think that if that was in place, that the minimum wage should be at something along those lines of $13 to $14.
So you're thinking like that somebody can live on. Like
somebody can live on if they're already past that training period. I think it should be $13.
So if we just lay out your integrated. So if we go with Australian model,
this is Australian model. Okay. I would say that livable wage should be around 13, 14.
That's the highest minimum that we have, right?
The highest minimum that we have.
Right. So we have like under 16, no minimum training wage. Next minimum, let's call it $10 an hour.
Yeah, you've already worked at this company for a year or two, whatever that training cap would be, whatever the economists determined. That would be whenever they would move you to that livable wage, of like $13 to $14 an hour. As of right now, in the current government standpoint, I would probably still raise the minimum wage without that Australian plan, to around $11 to $12 an hour. And again, this standpoint that I'm worried about is that kind of focuses on the single mothers, the people that are worried about, that need that money. We have to realize that there are people hurting for that and that are working multiple.
It's just that in my mind, that's not what minimum wage was supposed to be, right? I mean, I guess I get it, a livable wage, but it wasn't, oh no, here's a single mother with 2 children. Thank God the minimum wage saved her, right? That's why we have those social welfare programs that's what they're supposed to do. And like we alluded to, they don't do it very well. And so then people start to rely back on the minimum wage and say that's what it should do. And it's not really.
I mean, it's hard though, because the right side.
Because again, 17% of people making minimum wage don't support anyone.
Correct.
17%.
No, I thought 8.
Or sorry, other way around.
17% do support those. So it is less of a percentage, but I'm worried about those people and the elderly that are working about that.
I guess my point, to sum it up in a kind of blunt way, is just like we're barking up the wrong tree. That's it. Like there's another thing in the government like playbook that we're not fixing that, and that's like really where it could actually do what it's supposed to do. So I get that. I just think that if we rely on the minimum wage to be the way that we fix that, then like we're getting all the lines crossed. It's just
but I mean, again, if you're looking at like political sides, I know we're very diverse and we're not like talking from an extremist standpoint or anything along those lines. But the right that is against the minimum wage is also usually against those same social programs as well. So they kind of like to try to cut in both areas. Whereas the left is trying to give in both areas. So like
there might be a reason that they're against it though.
Well, they
Maybe
have
because they're both broken.
Well, they have their motivations, and I think that's a big thing, right? I mean, people look at the government from the right. I think because I came from that background, you probably understand this. You look at a system that's you know that these programs, especially the welfare, social well-being programs, they're just poorly run. Like if they
There's too many loopholes to take advantage.
If they were ran effectively, then like we probably
They
wouldn't
might
even be
work.
having this debate right
Correct.
now because we wouldn't be trying to make the minimum wage compensate for what they're not doing.
If everything worked
Right.
correctly, we'd be in utopia. Nobody would talk
Well,
about this politics. I mean, it's just.
Yeah.
But anyways, I'm kind of got
So
off
yeah,
track there.
no,
Again.
that's awesome. I mean, like I think, like I said earlier, like how we're gonna find compromise. Like,
Yeah.
but I actually like if I'm gonna be realistic about this market that we live in, which is not a free market
Yeah.
in America. You know, we already have the minimum wage. What should we do about it? I think you and I could find something that
that
we could agree on,
a little
like,
bit
'cause-
more closer in the middle.
because you're giving me something that I feel is important, which is that ability for the unskilled labor to grab that bottom rung of the ladder.
Yeah.
And I think that's key. I think that's the biggest problem that I have with the minimum wage is the fact that it like undoubtedly has to do that, you know?
Yep.
Because we don't have to get back into it, but right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the biggest problem for me, and I think that this kind of compromise of like what Australia has accounts for that, and it accounts for what you're looking for too. So let's turn it over to Justin then.
I think it's too risky. I think what you're saying is too risky.
The sliding scale.
The $12 an hour, 12, 13 an hour.
Okay, so that's the
Oh.
flat one. If we just
No,
took
that's the
that
Australian. Wait.
No. How you said that people should get 12, 13 bucks an hour, livable wage.
yeah.
Livable wage in the Australian model. I said 11 to 12
Well,
in
I'm talking
the model.
about the U.S.
The model right now, without
In our model, in our country.
in our
Okay.
model right now, I only stated 11 to 12.
Yeah, I still think
Yeah, because I was a little confused there too. So if we weren't to go to some progressive scheme, like let's just call it that.
Correct. Yeah.
Then you would be for something like 11 to 12. You
11
feel
to
like
$12 to increase to that. Whereas if we did,
And under that model, Justin, you are
I
at.
think unemployment will skyrocket and businesses would close and the economy might crash.
It's a concern.
I think it's too risky.
So where do you
I
feel
think
comfortable?
Maybe like 9.
Okay.
That's even high for me. I'd say probably around like 8.75, 9.
Okay.
but you're still
I think
okay with an increase, or you would want to keep it
a
where
slight
it's at?
increase.
Like that's what
Just
I'm
a
just
very,
kinda-
very slight.
Say 725. If we do that math real quick, like that's not marginal. You know, like a 725 to 9% or to $9. You know, it's $1.75 on 725.
I think it's- I think
that's
it's a big
that's
jump.
decent
But I think
percentage.
that's meeting in the middle. Like I don't think it
Well,
should
true, yeah.
Like I personally
Yeah.
don't think it should increase. I think it should increase less than $1. But I also think people deserve a nice increase because it's been a long time.
Yeah. Do you think? I mean, just real quick. I think just get a quick opinion on this. Don't dive into it. But you brought up something interesting earlier that made me think of this. What would we feel about putting a law in place that says that Congress can't, at any one point, raise the minimum wage more than this percent
No, I
at a
agree with
time?
that.
I think that would be healthy for the
Because I
market.
think it's too dangerous.
Well, I mean, that percent doesn't have to be
drastic
3.
changes.
You know, like
Yeah.
it can be some
Well,
maximum
no,
cap.
I think,
but like,
I think
just an idea.
I think
Maybe.
they fucked up by not raising it.
In the past,
we haven't touched it.
Correct.
We haven't.
I can understand that. Like
'Cause
the
obviously-
drastic change.
Obviously, costs go up and inflation happens, and you need to take that into account. I mean, you can't just let it sit there.
Yeah.
Like my whole thing is you can't just you can't give somebody something and then take it away.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking the business owner perspective, and
Yeah.
I just think it's too risky. I think maybe a little over 8 would be fair because you can get a career. I was a single dad. I was working a full-time job, going to school while working a part-time job. It's situational, and I understand some people can't do that. But
Right.
like you said, we have social programs that can help with that.
Well, they're supposed to.
Yeah, but everybody can it's a free market economy. Anybody can make their own life. So if you're not happy, get happy.
Yeah, I mean, it's the American dream, but we already talked about the sort of the crippling things about where people are nowadays, especially these unskilled labor workers, right? Like, it's. Man,
But
it's
let's
kinda
be real.
easy
Who's
for
going to be
us
affected? Mostly teenagers.
Well, that's true, and we have to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Now, there are, just like DJ's worried about the 17% of that minimum wage group that are actually the people
Yeah.
supporting a child or a family, right? You
It's
know,
not-
we don't
it's-
have to. That doesn't mean we forget about the other ones. It just means that, you know, if we're deciding to make a policy just based on that, and there's more to it. There's more to the story, you know.
I kind of just real quick. I feel like that 17 number almost desensitizes the value 17% because that is millions of people.
Yeah.
That
No, you're right.
17% is
Yeah.
a very
It is a
large
lot of people.
population.
You're right,
You're
but
right.
but I'm also a firm believer in that you can't please everyone. So
Well, and
who are you
again,
going to please? The
like-
majority.
when we're talking about these things, like our economy and our nation and the number of citizens in it, it scales. Like it goes
Yeah.
generally up, but it goes up and down all the time, but trending upward. So like to say that like 1 million now, but in 100 years, 1 million's going to be like 1,000, right? Like scale is a part of it, and that's why percentages really kind of tend to be widely used in these kind of conversations, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I'm not saying. I just wanted to.
Yeah. No, it's true.
just-
It's a lot of people, and like when you think about
There's just some people that might like. I mean, people might not quite understand like
yeah.
how impactful even or like how big of those numbers are behind those percentages. So sometimes.
Right.
it's-
No,
I think it tells us. I think it tells us a lot, and like this has been very
Constructive.
one of our best productive conversations about this. I mean,
Yeah.
like we said, we in our introduction episode, we talk about this stuff all the time, and sometimes we get heated, sometimes we argue,
Yeah.
and we've been there even recently. But
I'm
like,
sure it's gonna happen.
but like, yeah,
there's
I
gonna
mean,
be times on here where I'm like, no, fuck no.
You guys are gonna see me raise. I might get up and just leave right in the middle at one point in time.
No, but this, especially for our pilot, right? Like this,
Yeah.
I think that something where we all kind of, and this isn't really staged. This is like we have these
Like
base
we've
principles.
talked about
Yeah.
minimum wage before, so it's something that we've discussed, but it's never like we've never dove down into it like we
Yeah.
have here.
We kind of just briefly talk about like one source or two sources,
Yeah.
kind of just quick glimpses of but we never really kind of dove.
Yeah, I mean, this
into
is really the first time we've all had the chance to get to that end goal, which is like, where can we compromise?
Yeah. Well, because
You know?
usually a lot of the times we're talking, it's more opinion and it's a lot of speculation. It's
Right.
More, it's
Let's be honest too. We only really get to talk when we all smoke cigarettes, so we all smoke breaks and get that quick 5-minute tidbit in.
Yeah.
But no, I think it was really constructive. I think
Yeah.
a lot of information was, like I said, I never even thought about some of the perspectives that you guys kind of pushed out.
Yeah. No, it's good. We all get that exposure of,
Yeah.
of ideas that, come from these various perspectives, right? And I mean, look at it. Like it allows you to have a healthy debate on a subject, right? Nobody got carried away. Nobody got tied up in getting angry or anything like that. I mean, again, we're friends, but like this is true even with like acquaintances and stuff. Like, if you approach someone respectfully, have a conversation with them, not claiming to know, because especially in this argument, it's like, how can we know? We think we can see correlations and stuff, but how do we really get anywhere? And so, yeah, this is great. I guess we'll just wrap it up.
Yeah.
We're really just we're excited that we got our pilot out here, and we're looking forward to bringing more. Definitely leave us some feedback. Let us know what you think about this, about our introduction, the format, whatever you want to throw out at us. We're really open to ideas right now, especially at the start.
Yeah, like you said, nothing's concrete.
Yeah.
We're open to any criticism. Just try to keep it positive.
Yeah.
We'd appreciate that.
All right. Thank you.
Guys,
Thank you.
move on.